The arena was silent now. Only dust and broken stones remained. Once it was the loudest place in the galaxy, where thousands shouted for blood and cheered for death, but now it was empty. Like the broken heart of the warrior who once ruled it, she sat alone in the shadows, her body tall and powerful, her skin marked with scars that told stories of battles she never wished to remember. She was an alien gladiator, once the most feared fighter of them all, but she had sworn an oath. Never again would she fight, never again would she spill blood. For the pleasure of others, her claws rested on her knees, her eyes fixed on the ground. The chains that once bound her to the arena walls still hung there, rusted and broken, a reminder of what she had been. Every night she heard the echoes of the crowd, the sound of their cruel laughter, the roar of their hunger for violence, but she no longer belonged to them. She had promised herself never again. The galaxy still whispered her name, calling her the beast of the pit, but to her, the title was a curse. She remembered the faces of the fallen, warriors who had begged for mercy, enemies who had cried out before her claws ended them. The screams haunted her dreams, and when she woke, she felt the weight of every soul she had taken. Her mind drifted back to the only moment of light in her dark life, a human, small and fragile compared to her kind, yet braver than anyone she had ever known. He had not looked at her with fear. He had not called her a monster. He had spoken to her as if she was more than a weapon, more than a slave of the arena. He had treated her like she mattered, like she was someone worth saving. But that was long ago, before the chains grew tighter, before the masters forced her to fight until her body broke. She thought of him sometimes, wondering if he had survived, wondering if he even remembered her. It was that memory that gave her the strength to make her oath, the strength to walk away from the arena. Never again would she fight for them. Never again would she kill for their amusement. Outside, the galaxy still burned with wars and cruelty, but she had hidden herself away. Some called her a coward for leaving the arena. Others called her weak, but she knew the truth. It took more strength to resist than to obey. It took more courage to stay silent than to roar. And so she sat, waiting, breathing, trying to forget. But fate does not forget those who walk away from it. One night, as she listened to the faint hum of the city outside the arena walls, she heard voices, slaves whispering about a new prisoner brought to the pit. A human, they said, one who refused to bow, one who fought against the chains. At first she ignored it. Humans often came to this place and humans often died. But then a name was spoken, a name she had not heard in years. Her heart stopped, her claws clenched against the stone. It could not be, it should not be, and yet the whispers grew louder. She rose to her feet, her body trembling, the oath she swore pressing against her chest like a heavy chain. If it was him, if the human she once knew had truly been dragged into the arena, then everything she had promised would be tested. Her mind screamed at her to stay back, to remember her oath, but her heart whispered a different truth. If he was there, if he was about to face the same death she had endured, then she could not turn away. She walked slowly to the gate that overlooked the arena floor, her steps echoing in the hollow tunnels. She had not stood here in years, yet every corner of the place remembered her. The smell of blood clung to the air. The stones still carried the stains of those who had fallen. And then she saw him, chained and beaten, yet standing tall, his eyes burning with defiance. Her chest tightened, her breath caught in her throat. It was him. It was truly him. The announcer's voice rang across the arena, loud and cruel. Tonight, the beast of the pit returns, and her opponent is a human who dares to defy us. The crowd roared with madness, stamping their feet, screaming for violence. The gates began to open, and she knew what they had planned. They would force her to break her oath. They would force her to kill the only one who had ever seen her as more than a monster. Her claws curled, her body shaking. The human raised his head. Their eyes met, and in that single moment she felt everything: pain, hope, fear, and something deeper. Her oath echoed in her mind, never again, never again. But now, as the crowd screamed for blood, she knew her promise would not last. The arena would rise. Again, the chains would rattle, and her fight, the fight she swore she would never return to, was about to begin. The iron doors of the arena creaked open, their rusty sound echoing like thunder across the empty night sky. The crowd was already restless, stamping their feet, howling for a show. But what they saw next was not a beast, not a monster, not a trained killer. It was a human. Shackled, bruised, yet standing tall, the guards dragged him across the blood-soaked sand, chains clinking with every step. He stumbled, his knees weak, but he did not fall. The whip of a guard cracked against his back, but he only clenched his jaw. The crowd laughed at his pain, spitting down from the high walls, calling him weak, calling him prey. Yet in his eyes there was no fear, only fire, only defiance. She watched from the shadows of the gate, her heart pounding harder than it ever had in battle. The human's face was older now, scarred from fights she had not seen. But it was still him, the same one who once gave her kindness when no one else would. The one who had dared to see her not as a beast, but as someone worth saving. Her claws trembled against the stone, every part of her body screaming to run into the arena. But her oath still chained her. The promise she made to herself still burned like fire in her chest. The announcer's voice boomed, cruel and mocking. Tonight, the beast of the pit faces her greatest test. A human who has refused every chain, defied every master, and now stands ready to die before you. The crowd roared with madness, cheering, chanting, demanding blood. The guards shoved the human to the center of the arena, his chains rattling as he raised his head. He looked around at the endless faces screaming for his death, yet he stood tall, his eyes filled with quiet strength. The gate beside her began to move, heavy gears grinding, dust falling from the ceiling. She knew what it meant. It was her gate, her entrance. The masters were calling her back into the pit. Whether she wanted it or not, her chest tightened. Her oath crumbled inside her. She whispered to herself, never again, never again. But the words felt weak now. The human lifted his head toward the shadows where she stood, and their eyes met. It was only for a moment, but it was enough. He knew. He recognized her. The shock in his gaze quickly replaced by something else, something she had not seen in anyone's eyes for years. It was trust, pure and unshaken. Her heart ached. Her claws dug into her palms. The crowd did not see it, but she felt it, a silent message passing between them. No matter what the arena demanded, she could not kill him. The gate opened fully. The chains rattled, the dust rose, and the beast of the pit stepped into the light. Once more, the crowd went wild, their chants shaking the stone walls. Fight, 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 they screamed, slamming their fists against the iron railings. The human stood waiting, his chest rising and falling, his chains clinking softly with every breath. He did not step back. He did not beg. He only stood, firm, waiting for her. The announcer laughed, his voice cruel and sharp. This is no battle of strength. This is a test of loyalty. Will the beast kill the one she once cared for, or will she break before your eyes? The crowd cheered, hungry for blood, hungry for betrayal. She walked forward slowly, every step heavy as if the sand itself was trying to hold her back. The torches lit her scars, her towering body, her claws that had ended countless lives. The human's eyes never left her, not with fear, but with something stronger. He whispered something under his breath, too soft for the crowd, but she read his lips. Do not give up. Her heart thundered in her chest. She wanted to scream, to break her chains again, but the masters were watching. If she refused to fight, they would kill him anyway, and her too. The crowd would turn on them both, and the arena would swallow their names forever. The signal horn blew, sharp and final. The battle had begun. The crowd exploded with noise, their chants rising like fire. The human raised his fists despite the chains, his body battered but ready. She froze, her claws trembling, her oath tearing apart inside her. Never again, never again. But here she was, facing the only one she ever loved. The human moved first, not to attack, but to make it look real. He swung his chained fists, slow and weak, striking her shoulder. She staggered back, not from the hit, but from the memory it carried, memories of training, of laughter, of whispered words shared when no one else dared speak to her. Every movement tore open wounds she had buried long ago. The crowd cheered louder, thinking they were watching the beginning of a slaughter, but in truth, they were watching the beginning of something else, something far more dangerous than blood. They were watching the return of a bond stronger than chains, stronger than fear. And the masters of the arena felt it too, their smiles fading, their eyes narrowing, for they knew if these two stood together, the arena would never be the same. The horns still echoed in the arena, sharp and cold. The crowd shouted louder, their voices crashing like a storm. They wanted blood. They wanted to see the beast rip the human apart. But inside the pit, two hearts refused to obey. The gladiator stepped forward, her claws gleaming in the torchlight. Every scar on her body screamed her past. Every breath reminded her of her oath. The human tightened his fists, the chains rattling with each movement. He knew the crowd was watching. He knew the masters were waiting for a show. If they did nothing, if they refused to fight, the arena guards would cut them down without mercy. He whispered again, his lips barely moving, "Hit me." Her claws trembled. She shook her head, her eyes burning with pain. But the human swung his chained fist toward her chest, a weak blow that barely touched her. She staggered back as if struck hard, the crowd roaring with approval. The act had begun. She raised her claw slowly, swinging wide, striking the air just inches from his head. The human ducked, rolling across the sand as if barely surviving. The crowd went wild, stamping their feet, believing they were seeing death dance. Before them, every move was a lie, every strike a shadow of what it could be. But both of them knew the truth. This was survival. The human charged again, swinging his chains against her arm. She roared, not in anger but in performance, letting the sound echo across the arena. The crowd screamed in madness, their hunger growing every time she pulled back her claws, every time she missed on purpose. The bond between them grew stronger. It was not a battle, it was a memory of trust. But the arena masters were no fools. From the high balcony, the master of the pit leaned forward, his sharp eyes narrowing. He could see it, he could feel it. This was no true fight. The crowd might be blind, but he was not. He whispered to his guards, his voice cold and cruel, "Release the beasts." The ground trembled as hidden gates opened. From the darkness came a roar that shook the walls. Beasts bred for war, their bodies twice the size of the human, their fangs dripping with venom. The crowd gasped, then cheered louder than ever. They thought it was part of the show, but for the two in the pit, it was the beginning of something far worse. The human spun, his eyes widening at the sight of the monsters. The gladiator's chest tightened, her oath cracking apart with every breath. This was no longer an act, this was life or death. The beasts lunged forward, claws slashing, jaws snapping. The human raised his chains, barely blocking a strike that sent him crashing into the sand. Blood spilled from his arm, right against the dirt. She roared, not in performance this time, but in fury. Her claws ripped across one beast's face, the sound of bone cracking echoing through the arena. The crowd erupted, their cheers shaking the ground. They thought the fight had finally begun, but they did not understand. This was no fight between the gladiator and the human. This was a war against the arena itself. The human staggered to his feet, his chest rising with pain. He grabbed a broken chain from the sand, swinging it like a weapon. The gladiator moved to his side, her massive body shielding him from another beast. Together, they fought as if they had never been apart. Every move was natural, every strike in perfect rhythm. She slashed, he struck, she blocked. He countered. It was like breathing, like remembering a song they once sang together. The crowd could not see the truth, but they felt something strange. The air in the arena shifted, heavy with a power they had not known. It was not just a fight, it was a bond, and bonds were more dangerous than claws. The beasts howled, one after another falling into the sand, their blood staining the ground. The human gasped, his body weak but unbroken. The gladiator stood tall, her chest heaving, her claws dripping, and in the silence between roars, their eyes met. No words were spoken, but both understood together they were unstoppable. Above, the arena master clenched his fists. This was not the show he wanted. This was rebellion. This was hope, and hope was the one thing he could not allow to live. He turned to his guards, his voice sharp as a blade. When the beasts fall, send the assassins. And them both before the crowd sees too much. The gladiator looked up at the balcony, her sharp eyes meeting his for only a moment. She knew what was coming. She felt the trap tightening, but she also felt something else. Something she had buried deep for years. The human's presence had awakened it. A fire that chains could not hold, a strength born not from rage but from love. The crowd roared again as the last beast fell to the sand, its body twitching in death. The human and the gladiator stood side by side, battered and bloodied. But alive, the arena had demanded a fight between them, but instead, it had been given something far more dangerous, a bond reborn in blood, a defiance stronger than fear. The master's trap was closing, but for the first time in years, the gladiator welcomed it, for she was no longer fighting for survival, she was fighting for him. The last beast collapsed with a broken roar, its massive body shaking the arena floor as it fell. The crowd erupted in wild screams, their voices thundering like a storm across the night. They chanted her name, the name she had once hated, the name they had carved into her with chains and blood. The beast of the pit, the beast of the pit, they howled, their fists pounding the iron walls. But this time, she did not fight alone. The human stood at her side, blood running from his arm, sweat dripping from his brow, his chest rising with every heavy breath. He was battered, broken, but unbowed. The sight of him fighting beside her had awakened something inside her chest, something she had buried for years, a fire stronger than any oath, stronger than any chain. The crowd thought they had watched a simple show of strength, but the arena master saw the truth. From his high balcony, his cold eyes narrowed, his lips curling into a thin, cruel smile. He had wanted blood. He had wanted a slave to break. Instead, he had seen a legend reborn. The master's voice cut through the noise, sharp and cruel. Do not celebrate too soon. The fight is not over. He raised his hand, and the guards surrounding the pit stiffened, blades glinted in the torchlight. Assassins hidden in the shadows now stepping forward, their faces covered, their weapons dripping with poison. The human staggered, his chains heavy, his body weakened from the fight with the beasts. He looked up at her, his eyes burning with defiance. He knew what was coming. He knew the master would never allow them to leave alive. The gladiator growled low in her throat, her claws flexing, her body still strong despite the wounds she carried. She had sworn never to fight again, but for him, she would fight until her last breath. The assassins leapt into the arena, their steps silent, their blades shining. The crowd gasped, then cheered even louder, believing this was another twist. To entertain them, they did not understand the truth. This was not entertainment. This was execution. The human raised his broken chain like a weapon, his stance unshaken despite his wounds. Stay close, he whispered, his voice raw but steady. She nodded, her claws gleaming in the torchlight. For the first time in years, she felt alive again, not as a weapon for the crowd, but as a shield for him. The first assassin struck, his blade slicing through the air. She moved faster than the eye could follow, catching his wrist, snapping bone like dry wood. The man screamed, his blade falling into the sand. The crowd roared with delight, believing this was part of the show. They could not see that every strike was real, every cut filled with death. Another assassin lunged for the human, his poisoned dagger aimed for the heart. The human twisted, the chain in his hands wrapping around the attacker's throat. With one pull, he dragged the assassin to the ground, slamming his knee into his chest. The crowd gasped, then screamed again, their hunger for blood now fully fed. The arena floor became chaos, blades clashing, blood spilling, sand stained red under the torches. The gladiator fought like a storm, her roars shaking the walls, her claws tearing through steel and flesh alike. The human fought with everything left in him, his movements sharp, his spirit unbroken. Together they moved as one, back to back, unyielding, unstoppable. But in the shadows above, the master was furious. This was not how it was supposed to end. The crowd was not supposed to cheer for rebellion, not supposed to admire the bond between a beast and a human. He slammed his fist against the balcony rail, his voice cold and venomous. Take the human alive, kill the beast. The words reached her ears, and her chest tightened. They would not let him live as he was. They would chain him, break him, turn him into another slave of the pit. Her vision burned red, her claws tearing deeper into every enemy that dared step close. She would not allow it. Not again, never again. The assassins kept coming, but the pile of bodies at their feet grew higher, still. The human bled more with every strike, his body weaker with each breath. She saw it, she felt it. The fight was draining him. Her heart raged, her oath shattered. Completely, she had sworn never to fight again, but now she understood her oath had been wrong. It was not fighting that destroyed her, it was fighting without a reason, and now, she had the greatest reason of all. The crowd, blind to the betrayal and the master's order, believed they were witnessing the greatest battle in the history of the arena. They chanted louder, their voices shaking the stone, their fists hammering. Against the rails, they were not cheering for the master anymore, they were cheering for them. The gladiator and the human, fighting as one. The master's face twisted with rage as he realized what was happening. The crowd was no longer his. Their loyalty was slipping, and in the pit, blood still dripping from her claws, the gladiator raised her head, her eyes locking onto his. For the first time, she did not look like a beast. She looked like a queen. The human staggered beside her, his chest heaving, his chains broken and bloody. She stepped in front of him, her body a shield, her voice a growl that echoed across the arena. "If you want him," she said, her voice cutting through the roar of the crowd, "you will have to kill me first." The arena fell silent for a heartbeat, the crowd holding its breath. Then, like thunder, the chant rose again, louder than ever. Not beast of the pit, not the name they once forced on her, but a new cry, a cry of rebellion. Freedom, freedom, freedom. And in that moment, the master of the pit knew. The chains of the arena were breaking. The arena stank of blood. The sand dark and wet beneath their feet. Bodies of assassins lay scattered, broken and silent. The crowd was still chanting, still screaming for more, their voices like thunder rolling across the sky. But in the master's balcony, silence reigned, cold and sharp. The master sat back in his chair, his hands tight on the iron rail. His eyes burned with rage, but behind the fury, there was calculation. This was his arena, his empire, his throne built from chains and blood. He would not let to fighters, a beast and a human, turn it into a cradle of rebellion. He raised his hand, and the noise of the crowd fell quiet. The torches flickered, the drums stopped. Even the wind seemed to vanish. His voice rang out, cold and heavy. "You think this fight makes you free, but nothing leaves this arena without my chains." The gladiator glared up at him, her claws still wet with blood. The human leaned against her side, his chest rising and falling, his face pale but unbroken. Together they stood, defiant even in their exhaustion. The crowd held its breath, waiting for what would come next. The master gestured, and the ground trembled. Massive iron gates began to rise at the far end of the pit, their chains rattling like thunder. Behind them, shadows moved, heavy shapes growling in the darkness. The crowd gasped, their whispers spreading like fire. "Not the war beasts. He cannot unleash the war beasts." But the master smiled, his teeth sharp in the torchlight. Tonight was no longer about entertainment. Tonight was about crushing hope. If the crowd saw their heroes fall, if the bond between beast and human was broken in blood, then the whispers of rebellion would die here with them. The gladiator felt the ground shake beneath her feet. She had fought many beasts, many monsters in this pit, but the war beasts were different. They were killers bred from nightmares. They had no chains, no masters but the arena itself. Her body tensed, every scar on her skin screaming a warning. The human gripped her arm, his voice rough but steady. "This is not just a fight, it's a trap." She looked at him, and for a moment the noise of the crowd faded. "Yes," she growled, "but we do not break." The gates crashed open, and the war beasts stormed out, their bodies huge and armored, their eyes glowing with hunger. Their roars shook the walls, their claws tearing into the sand. The crowd screamed in both terror and delight, their fear mixing with excitement. The master leaned forward, his voice cold. "Let them tear each other apart." The human staggered, but lifted the broken chain, still clutched in his hand. The gladiator stood taller, her claws shining under the torches. They had no weapons but each other, no armor but trust. The beasts circled them, their jaws snapping, their growls echoing. Like drums of war, the first beast lunged, its fangs snapping toward the human. The gladiator roared, shoving him aside and slashing its throat in one motion. blood sprayed across the sand. The crowd shrieking in madness, the master's smile faltered, but he did not stop the fight. He wanted them exhausted, drained, broken. Another beast crashed into her side, its weight sending her sprawling across the sand. The human ran to her, swinging his chain against its eyes, blinding it long enough for her to rise. They moved together. Again, every strike a rhythm, every dodge a memory, but for every beast that fell, another charged. The trap was clear. The master would drown them in endless blood until there was nothing left. The crowd began to shift, their cheers turning uneasy. They had come for a show, but this was slaughter. They watched the gladiator bleed. They watched the humans stagger, and slowly they began to see the truth. This was not a battle. This was punishment. The gladiator felt her strength slipping, her body heavy, her breath ragged. The human's legs shook, blood staining his chains, his face pale. But when their eyes met, even through the pain, the fire still burned. They had promised without words they would not break. The master rose from his throne, his cloak sweeping behind him. He raised both arms, his voice cutting through the chaos. Behold your heroes. Behold their weakness. They are not legends. They are prisoners. And tonight, their blood will remind you who owns this pit. The crowd hissed. Some cheered, but others murmured with unease. They had seen the bond between beast and human. They had felt the strength it carried. The master's trap was not only set for the fighters, it was set for the people to break their faith now, and he would keep his empire. But if the two in the pit survived, then the chains of the arena would shatter. The gladiator stood taller despite the wounds, her claws dripping, her chest burning with fire. She raised her head, her voice thundering through the arena. You call me a beast, but I am no slave. You call him weak, but he stands while others fall. We are not yours, we are ours. The crowd roared, their voices shaking the sky. The master's face darkened, his trap was slipping. The gladiator and the human stood back to back, surrounded by war beasts, assassins waiting, guards circling. But for the first time, the pit no longer belonged to the master, it belonged to them. The war beasts circled like shadows with teeth, their growls shaking the ground. The assassins stood at the edges, their blades ready, their eyes fixed on the human. The guards closed the gates behind them, locking away any chance of escape. And above it all, the master stood with his cruel smile, believing his trap would break them. The human's breath came, ragged, his chest rising and falling, blood dripping from his arm, but still he stood, chains in hand, his eyes locked not on the beasts, but on her, the gladiator, the one they had called a monster, a slave, a weapon. Her body was scarred, her claws dripping, her shoulders heavy, but in her chest burned a fire brighter than the torches of the pit. For too long she had carried the weight of her oath. For too long she had believed she could only live in silence, in exile. But now, seeing him standing beside her, wounded yet unbroken, she understood. Her oath had been a cage, her silence another chain, and tonight, she would break them all. The first war beast lunged, its jaws snapping toward the human. In one motion she leapt, her roar echoing like thunder. Her claws tore through its throat, blood spraying across the sand. The crowd erupted, their screams shaking the walls. But this time, it was not madness. It was awe. The second beast charged, its claws striking her side. She staggered, but did not fall. Her muscles burning, her blood dripping. The human struck with his chain, wrapping it around the beast's neck, holding it long enough for her to rip it apart. Together, they stood tall, every movement in rhythm, every strike a promise. The assassins rushed in, their blades flashing. The gladiator moved faster than she ever had, her claws carving through steel and bone. The human fought at her back, his chain whipping, his fists striking, his defiance burning brighter than pain. The sand turned red, bodies falling one by one. The crowd no longer cheered for the master, they cheered for them. The master slammed his fists against the balcony rail, his voice filled with rage. End this now. Kill the human, break the beast. But his words were drowned by the roar of the people. Freedom, 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 they cried, their voices thundering. The walls shook, the torches flickered, the arena itself seemed to tremble. The gladiator raised her head, her chest heaving, her claws dripping. She looked at the human, and in his eyes she saw the truth. They had already won, not with claws, not with chains, but with defiance. Still, the battle raged. The beasts closing in again, the assassins striking. She could feel her body breaking, her strength burning away, but she refused to fall. One final beast, larger than the rest, lunged from the shadows, its body armored, its jaws wide, its roar shaking the sky. The crowd screamed. The human staggered back, his chain slipping from his hands. The master leaned forward, his cruel smile returning. "This ends now," he whispered, but the gladiator roared, louder than she ever had, a sound that silenced the crowd. She grabbed the broken chains from her wrists, pulling until the metal snapped like glass. The shackles shattered, falling to the sand. The crowd gasped, their voices turning to thunder. She was no longer bound, no longer chained, no longer theirs. Her claws sank deep into the beast's neck, ripping through its armor, tearing it apart with fury. The monster collapsed, its body shaking the ground. She stood above it, her chest rising, her eyes blazing with fire. The crowd roared like never before, chanting not beast of the pit, but something new. The gladiator, the gladiator. The assassins froze, fear in their eyes. The guards at the gates hesitated, their weapons shaking in their hands. Even the master felt it, the shift, the power slipping from his grip. This was no longer his arena, this was hers. The human stepped beside her, bloodied but unbroken. She placed a clawed hand on his shoulder, steadying him, protecting him. Her voice rang out across the pit, sharp and powerful. "I fought for survival once, I fought for your amusement once, but now I fight for him, and I will never bow again." The crowd exploded, their chants rising. Into the night, the master shouted for order, but no one listened. His empire of blood was crumbling, his chains snapping one by one. The gladiator raised her claws, her body blazing in torchlight. For the first time, she was not the beast, she was the last gladiator. The human looked up at her, his lips curling into a tired smile. "You broke your oath," he whispered. She looked down, her eyes fierce yet gentle. "No," she growled, "I found its true meaning." And with the crowd behind them, the assassins trembling, the guards faltering, they stood together, not as prisoner and beast, but as warriors, as legends, as hope. The master's trap had failed, and now the arena itself was slipping from his hands. The arena shook with the cries of thousands, their voices rising like thunder, no longer chanting for the master, no longer calling for blood. They chanted for her, for them, for the impossible bond that had defied every chain. The gladiator, they roared, and the walls themselves seemed to tremble. The master's face twisted with fury, his hands gripping the balcony rail until his knuckles turned white. This was his empire, his pit, his kingdom of chains and fear, and yet, in one night, it was slipping from him. The crowd no longer obeyed, the assassins hesitated, the guards faltered, all because of a beast who refused to bow, and a human who refused to break. "Kill them," the master roared, his voice breaking. "Kill them now, or you will all die." But his words fell into chaos. The guards looked at one another, uncertain. The assassins stepped back, their blades lowering. Even the war beasts that still lived growled low, sensing the shift, sensing fear not in the pit, but above it. The gladiator stood tall in the center of the blood-soaked sand, the human at her side, her chains shattered, her claws dripping, her eyes blazing. She looked up at the balcony, her voice thundering across the pit. "Your empire ends tonight." The crowd roared again, louder, stronger. The master staggered back, but his pride held him. He would not run, he would not show weakness. He raised his hand, and hidden doors opened at the sides of the pit. From them marched armored guards, hundreds of them, shields raised, blades sharp. This was no fight, this was a war. The human clenched the broken chain in his fist, his body weak but his spirit unbroken. He glanced at her, his voice rough but steady. "Freedom or death," he whispered. She looked down at him, her chest heavy, her heart burning. "Yes," she growled. Together, the guards stormed forward, their boots pounding, their shields clashing. The gladiator roared, charging into them like a storm. Her claws tore through steel, her body crashed against their shields, sending them flying. the human fought at her back, every strike of his chain fueled by defiance, every step proof of his will. They fought not as slaves, not as pawns, but as warriors. The crowd screamed with every strike, every clash, not for death, but for freedom. Their voices shook the stones. The arena was no longer a cage, it was becoming a battlefield of rebellion. The master screamed orders, his voice drowned by the chants. He drew a blade from his side, a weapon gilded in gold, and with fury burning his veins. He stepped down from his throne. For the first time, he would dirty his own hands. The guards parted as he walked into the pit, his cloak dragging across the blood-stained sand. The crowd gasped, silence falling for a heartbeat. The master himself had entered the arena. He pointed his blade at them, his voice sharp and venomous. You are nothing, a beast and a slave, and I will end you with my own hands. The gladiator stepped forward, her body towering, her claws gleaming, her voice rolled like thunder. Come then, master of chains. Face the last gladiator. The duel began, the master striking fast, his blade flashing. But she moved like fire, blocking, countering, her claws slashing against steel. The human joined her, his chain striking the master's arm, forcing him back. Together, they pressed him, every blow fueled not by anger but by purpose. The master's blade cut her shoulder, blood spraying, but she did not fall. The master's boot struck the human down, but he rose again, his eyes blazing. The crowd's chants grew louder. Freedom, 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 they roared. The walls trembled, thus falling from the ceiling. The arena was breaking, both in stone and in spirit. The master swung his blade in a desperate strike, but she caught it in her claws, twisting it until it snapped in two. His eyes widened with fear, the first fear he had ever shown. The human stepped beside her, his chain wrapping around the master's throat, dragging him to his knees. The gladiator raised her claw, her voice thundering, this is for every soul you broke. And with one strike, the master fell. The pit shook with silence, then erupted. With a roar that shook the skies, the crowd poured into the arena, tearing down the banners, breaking the chains. The guards threw down their weapons, the assassins fled. The empire of blood was finished. The gladiator stood with the human, both covered in blood and scars, but alive. She looked at him, her chest heavy, her heart blazing. You live, she growled softly. He smiled, weak but real, because of you. The crowd knelt, thousands bowing not to a master, not to a beast, but to a legend. The gladiator lifted the human's arm, raising it high. Not beast, not slave, not master, she roared. Together, free. The crowd echoed her words, their voices rolling across the galaxy. That night, the arena of chains became the cradle of freedom, and the story of the last gladiator and the human she loved was carved into history forever.